Hey team, welcome back to the show. Today it is Coach Andrea and I getting into part four of the photo shoot prep series. Today we're going to be talking through how to go from lean to ripped in the last half of the diet. Basically, as we get into the later stages of the diet, which again really is where we are going from lean to ripped. We're really seeing your physique change. We're really seeing the muscle tissue that you built come through and kind of that photo shoot shape emerge. This is also a lot different than the first half of the diet, right? There's new challenges, can be quite a lot harder. So really like your biofeedback will change quite a lot. There are just a lot of different considerations we need to take into place. So really talking through what this phase of the diet looks like. And I will say for like a lot of people, this doesn't really come up in photo shoot cases actually, but in like a lot of conversations with newer clients, people talk through like I feel like in the past when I try to diet, like I get through the first half of the diet and then I can't see it through. I don't like ultimately get to where I want to be. And this is where we really, okay, we change that, right? We get to where you want to be. That said, like I don't ever see this being a problem in photo shoot preps because people are normally very committed by that point. But really talking through what you need to know to get the best results in the last half of the phase, which again is really where like the physique that you'll have for that photo shoot will emerge. So I'm excited to chat about this. Now, as a refresher, if you didn't listen to the last episode on the photo shoot prep series, I would highly recommend doing so. There we talk through just the diet setup. So kind of establishing your timeline, rate of loss, nutrition adjustments, starting cardio, what training should look like, etc. But before we get into the topic for the week, Andrea, anything new going on with you?
Things are really moving in the fat loss phase now, which is fun. So I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. Must have been 2 weeks ago. Um, we dropped calories down, and I was down like a pound and a quarter, like a pound on average.
Okay.
But that was also the week of my cycle. And this week so far, I'm averaging down 2.6 pounds. So had
Damn.
a really big drop. But context there is again, like my cycle was last week. So I think that last week I would have seen a bigger drop had that not been the
Okay.
case. And then also we're leaving for a trip tomorrow. So I've front loaded all my cardio to the first
Okay.
4 days of this week. So I've definitely been, which I guess it would have been usually I do Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, unless I have legs on Tuesday, which almost is always the case.
Okay.
And I'll push it back a little bit more. So there's like 1 to 2 more sessions that I've done this week earlier on than I normally would. But all like I can just it feels like things have just kind of clicked in, which is kind of how my last few fat loss phases have gone, where things move really, really slowly. And then there's like a threshold of calorie drop where it just really starts to move. And then I can go a while without needing another adjustment.
You do always have very slow starts for some reason.
Yeah, I just need to
It's
hit like a
interesting.
certain level of calorie deficit to really get some momentum going, it seems like.
Hmm.
But I'm glad to have hit that point. And I'm at like 154, 155 right now. And that tends to be the turning point with my physique too, where I'm finally like, okay, I'm starting to like how I look again. Um, and I can appreciate a lot of things about the building phase physique too, but there just is always a turning point right around this weight where on the way up and on the way down, I start to see a big change.
I think that's pretty prevalent for the topic at hand too,
Yeah.
because even a lot of times, and this really depends on how much muscle you have, but for like most people in this instance, where if it's like the first photo shoot prep you've done, you might not have so much muscle that like at the peak of the building phase, you love how your physique looks, right?
Hmm.
Very few people do, honestly. And most of us like our physiques better, like when we're ripped, regardless, even if that's not sustainable. But in the first like half of the fat loss phase, oftentimes I was having this conversation with a couple of clients this week. Oftentimes you will see the scale is dropping, but I don't necessarily look like or don't necessarily feel that I'm seeing visual improvements.
Mhm.
And
It's
It
that
really,
ship at the bottom of a lake analogy.
I've used that analogy so many times this week, and every time I'm like, this is so dumb. I need a better analogy. Um, but I'll put it out there one more time. So if you've heard this a bunch of times already, please bear with me. But I kind of describe it like imagine that your body fat is like a lake, and the muscle you have is kind of like these structures, this ship or whatever at the bottom of it. First, like let's say we drain that lake by like 50%, but we haven't uncovered any of those structures yet. Really will just look like a smaller lake, right? Which is kind of what happens like the first half of the body or the first half of the fat loss phase. I know I've been through phases before where there's like that like 6, 8 weeks in where it's like I just look more depleted. I look like smaller, but I don't look like more ripped or more defined. I just look kind of skinny fat now. I feel like I
Hmm.
like look worse. And then it's normally a couple weeks after that point where we actually start to see because then again like let's imagine like we drain that like a little bit more and these like buildings and ships or whatever start to like pop through, right? The Lost Empire of Atlantis is down there, right? Then every little bit that we drain that lake further from there, it's going to look drastically different. And same thing goes for body fat, right? When someone like, if we have 20 pounds to lose to get you shredded, the first 10 won't like you that first 10 pounds you lose like it won't feel as big of a difference as the last 10, right? Because again, like every
Hmm.
pound that you lose from there is an exponentially larger percentage of your overall body fat that you're losing. So I don't know, just something to keep in mind in this journey as well, because I do think like this last half of this phase that we're talking about here is where you really will start to see the visual changes come through a lot more.
Yeah, for sure. That's when it gets fun.
Yeah. I would say though, it seems like typically, or at least the coaches you have worked with, to my knowledge, are a lot more conservative with how y'all are typically starting diet phases.
Oh yeah. Yeah, definitely. Austin was for sure. Brittany has been. Um, but we really have gotten to the point where it's a little more aggressive now,
Yeah. Yeah.
which that's just always how it goes, I think, with a coach that's newer with you, not newer coach, but newer with you, because you got to figure it out. Like you have to see how that person's going to respond. Why would we pull down super aggressively if this person could lose just fine on a lesser pull and that's going to keep their muscle a little bit better. So
Oh yeah.
just a
Yeah.
process of learning my body.
No, I have a couple clients I can think of where like our first fat loss phase, like I've talked about like Hunter's fat loss a lot recently.
Mhm.
Like the first phase we went through, I can think of like almost all my long-term clients where like, hey, initially we were a lot more conservative, especially like someone who's gone through like a health phase recently. I think that would be the case for you.
Mhm.
Like, hey, I want to be very cautious. I want to make sure we don't like skew your biofeedback or anything of the sort. And then in the next time we do it, it's oftentimes, okay, it makes sense for us to get a lot more aggressive and like just rip it. And that's what this person needs. And we can see progress a lot quicker initially. But
Mhm.
also like there's not a rush, right? As long as you're able to stick to the process, there's not a need for us to like, we have to lose X amount or we're failing. You're going to get there. So
Yeah.
cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's I've really liked using and I'll sometimes call it a mini cut, but it's not really a mini cut in that it's super aggressive, but just like a shorter, like maybe 6 week fat loss phase with people earlier on in
Mhm.
their journey. Cause then I can see, okay, this person's got a super adaptive metabolism, or this person needs to diet this way. And then whenever we get into the next fat loss phase, we can just click right in and we don't have to
Yeah.
do that all that figuring out in the longer phase.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a couple clients who I've started recently. I've had a lot of people come on board who want to do photo shoot preps, which, by the way, both of us are still taking on a few more clients. So if you're interested in photo shoot prep thing, going to talk through it more, reach out to us. You can DM either of us or just apply for coaching in the show notes. But I have a few people where we're spending like the next year or so building, and then the plan is to get into fat loss for a photo shoot. But I've intentionally planned in like a mini cut at very least, some around like the halfway point of the build phase. Simply because if nothing else, I want to be able to see like how their body will respond for fat loss and have a better feel for like, is the timeline that I laid out here for their fat loss phase actually accurate?
Hmm.
Okay, cool. Anything else new on your end?
No, what about you?
So I mean, what I think I talked about last week, really like last 3 or 4 weeks, I feel like with just more sickness and things like that, haven't I just training has been fine. Nothing all that crazy. I don't feel like it's been incredibly productive. Basically, have had to take like two deloads in the last 5 weeks. Just had to like take a couple of days self training, which drove me crazy, but was needed. My
Yeah.
back's feeling really good now. It was a very productive week of training. And then actually, I am going to be getting into a little bit of fat loss soon.
Oh,
Um, so the plan is either what, first or second week of January, actually get into some fat loss. So we're actually going to Portugal in
oh,
March.
okay.
Um, I haven't, Katie's just like mentioned it a couple times. Her, and like a couple of our friends are going. And it's like, yeah, cool. Love to go. And I honestly like, what's the like, what's the like name for it? It's not passenger princess, but something similar for like when you like go to the airport and your significant other like takes care of everything. You just like follow them around. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's a name for it, but that's me
That's
for
me.
sure.
That's me too. Yes. She's like the one who does all the planning for things like that. If she's involved, of course. Otherwise, like stuff like this, Natalie does all the planning for, or you guys.
Yeah.
Anyways, but thank God for them. But then I was like, wait, we're going on that, right? When is that? And she's like, oh yeah, it's actually like March 4th through the 12th. So it's just today actually Steve sent me over my update and because I was like, I would like to like I feel good um I feel really good where we're at here. Like I've especially for being like in the 230s and being in a building phase for so long because it's really like what my last photo shoot wrapped up October 26th of 2022. And since then, all I've done is I think I've done 7 weeks of dieting total in the like 2 years and change since then. It's just two little mini cuts.
Hmm.
But I mean, I still feel great at like current body composition. I'm definitely not my leanest, but like can still see my abs pretty well. By far the best we've been in the 230s. So, but I'm also excited but I did want to get leaner for that. So he has planned out right now 7 weeks of mini cutting. It'll
Hmm.
probably be a little bit slower than like traditional, like if we were to do 3 to 4 weeks, I think he was saying we'll probably aim for like 1.25, like 1 to 1.25% of body weight per week there. But even to get around like he's thinking like right around like 219, 220 will be pretty lean. And I'm excited to just get down again like 10, 15 pounds. Because I know I've talked about
Start
like,
feel better.
and I mean, I don't feel bad here. The only area, like, I can tell, like, your face looks leaner. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Like,
Yes, I hate that. I wish my face would stay lean. Like I would be so much better with the build phase physique if it weren't for my face getting a little bit rounder.
mine gets so round. That's like the only area I feel like I notice right now is my face is so much rounder, especially like whenever I get a haircut for some reason, I'm like, I feel like you just like see so many different angles of
Yeah.
your face you don't normally. And I'm like, man, my face is so much rounder than normal. Um, but I mean, past that, I feel good, but it'll be cool to see.
Mhm.
I really like if it wasn't for that, it would be good to keep building. But again, also with, again, we chatted about competing and potentially like doing that this next fall.
You're
I
waiting
don't
for the
want to,
men's fit model
yeah,
division.
men's bikini is what I'm waiting for. Um, but with that in mind, I also would like to see like when I am down just like 10 to 15 pounds, how do things look? Because I'm still really nervous. Like, uh, what if what if I actually just suck? So we'll see. Anyways, but yeah, so I mean, past that, it's just right now training, feeling really good again. I have been like I've been going to I have like all my home gym set up and then I had been like I feel like my training routine was a little bit off as well. Where there was just like a stretch there where it's like, man, I feel like it's been like because basically the weekends we've just been working on our house and I'm bad about like being social and I don't really consider that. And then it does like really start to bother me where it's like I haven't actually seen anyone except for my wife and my dog, which are my two favorite people, so that's fine. But like in like weeks and weeks. So I have started going to the gym a couple times per week as well. Basically, it's just we ended up like actually during the work week, I've been going to the gym and then um on the weekends I've been training at home when Katie's here. So it's like just kind of a nice like I don't know. I feel like when it's like I'm working at home, then I train at home as well. The headspace of it's like a little, it's almost kind of like you're still in a work and it's like a nice, like way to split up my day. And then, but on the flip side of like training at home when like Katie and Indigo, when Indigo's always here, but like when Katie's here, it just makes things more efficient. So also
Yeah.
kind of like figuring out that schedule, but I feel like we're like back in a good routine with all that now. So yeah, that's things on my end.
I feel like sometimes when things feel weird, like for you having the deload a couple times, it is kind of nice to break out of the routine. uh we have two memberships, two different gyms that we go to, and I'll always just go to the one. The other one we just kind of like take our kids to play and stuff on the turf field. But a couple of times the last couple of weeks I've gone to that other gym, and it's just been nice to kind of break out of the routine and have that feel a little bit fresh whenever I'm like on the verge of getting sick. I just wanted like a little less pressure on my
Yeah.
normal weight selection sort of thing. So it is kind of nice to do that occasionally too.
Oh yeah. No, I am one of my worst traits is how bad I am at canceling things that are like a minor inconvenience. I think I have 5 gym memberships right now.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah, it's a
it's
really
crazy.
big problem. Like probably like once a week, Katie's like looks at my key ring. She's like, "You're gonna cancel these?" I'm like, "Yeah, this week for sure." Just things like that that are like such a minor inconvenience. I'm terrible about. Anyways, let's go ahead and get into the topic. Good with that?
Yep.
Okay, so as almost all of our clientele are women, I think we first need to discuss, do we typically use a different approach for women versus men as we get deeper into fat loss? Which is very prevalent because this is a lot more so where things like this do start to come into consideration. Yeah, I remember when I started coaching, I thought it was brilliant because I knew it's like we need a calorie deficit for fat loss, right? Like, hey, we just need to eat less and move more. And it was really weird to see how that worked pretty well for like a lot of my male clients. It could be like, hey, we'll just intermittent fast, track your calories, protein. I don't care about food quality. Just let's eat like 1,500 calories a day. And I wasn't like doing a good job teaching people how to track accurately. So they're probably eating like 2,000, but like, hey, create a large enough deficit and they get it done. And these people seem to be fine. Whereas I remember with a lot of female clients, I'd be like, dude, we're just digging and digging and digging and nothing is happening. But I've really seen this like throughout most of my career as well. Like for most male clients, fat loss is typically pretty simple. As long as we're in what I'd expect to be a reasonable size deficit, almost anything usually works. And we can push it and push it and push it. And it's not normally a problem. I don't run into like these like consistent stalls or like things just don't add up for why this person isn't losing
Hmm.
nearly as much as I was running into with female clients. Um, Now on the flip side, with a lot of female clients, many will see fat loss stall much quicker on any given calorie intake. And again, are more prone to these like head scratcher scenarios where, man, we're dieting on pretty low calories, we're doing lots of cardio, but things just seem to not be moving. So digging into why might this be first, and this is again kind of just, I know we're the same approach here, but like as things have evolved over the years and understanding why we do need to take a more intelligent approach with female clients, digging into why this is, women have higher levels of essential body fat. Thus, you'll probably get to the point where your body is fighting back harder sooner as the floor for healthy body fat, below which your hormones, your ability to reproduce, how you feel, your biofeedback will really start to suffer. Again, that point is quite a lot higher than it is for men. What's essential body fat for women? Like 15?
Yeah, somewhere around there, 15 to 18, I
10.
believe. Oh, essential. Yeah,
I think it's like
really above
14,
15.
16, 13,
Yeah.
16. Let's say 15, roughly 14, 15. For men, I believe that number is like 8 to 10, all the way down to, I believe,
That
like 6.9 to 8, I
somewhere
think.
around there.
Around those ranges. Anyways, it is a decent bit higher for women. Now, similarly, they're very much related. The female hormonal system will be more sensitive to stress. It wouldn't make sense to, because again, like if we look at, okay, like your ability to reproduce, right? Having children, it wouldn't make sense to reproduce and grow a very calorically expensive child for 9 months if you are in an extremely high stress state where we might not be able to support that happening, or it would really detract from our own ability to survive. Dieting is a large stressor. So reproductive hormones, your sex hormones. that are also important for improving body composition can be downregulated. So I think these two things, again, the higher levels of essential body fat and again, your body, and it's really like you're more resilient to stress. It's not like women are, it's not, I don't know if I would say like more sensitive necessarily, but more resilient. And it's really interesting where like normally we think of, in this case, we think of it being a bad thing, right? My body adapts and it's harder for me to lose. But like in any other circumstance, like you adapting to something, a stressor is you being resilient, right? Whereas kind of the same thing here, though, if you look at it as your body senses fewer calories are coming in, your body wants to survive, and it just adapts to that quicker so that we don't keep losing these precious energy stores, aka body fat, to keep us alive and maintain these processes. Um, but basically, those two things again, women having higher levels of central body fat and the female hormonal system being more adaptive to stress lead to women, again, as a whole, being more adaptive to the stress of dieting, meaning your body could potentially adapt quicker to your current calorie intake and you could stop losing body fat sooner on set intake. And again, from a survival standpoint, it definitely makes sense as these higher levels of body fat are more essential for your health and ability to reproduce, but also could help explain why women might need a different approach than men when it comes to fat loss. Third, most women will have to diet on considerably less calories than men. It just takes fewer calories to sustain or lose from a smaller, lighter body. And I mean, and again, it varies a lot. Even like what you're 154 pounds right now,
Hmm.
right? And that's what's your diet intake?
I think my average is like 1650, 1700.
Okay. Okay. And you're like, I would say for most women, you're relatively tall and your weight is relatively high, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
Like,
five
because
nine.
you're 5'9", yeah.
Yeah.
And you have a lot of muscle mass as well.
Yeah.
But I'm on the flip side, like that's like I would say you're like more of an outlier on the like now your calorie intake that you can diet on. That's kind of the other direction, unfortunately, where like you can't diet on nearly as many calories that I would expect you to. But on the flip side, then it's like, but I'm still like you're kind of an outlier there, but I'm 80 pounds heavier than you are, still almost 80 pounds. I'm huge. Um, I'm like, but again, that's so still like it's, hey, I have another 80 pounds. I am going to need a lot more calories just to sustain that, to lose whatever it may be. So because women have to diet on relatively fewer calories, this does make it can make dieting harder psychologically, but it can also make getting your micronutrient needs like adequate B vitamins, selenium, iron more difficult because you don't have as many total calories to work with. Thus, we have a much smaller budget to squeeze all those things in. Now, these micros are a vital part of supporting things like thyroid function, hormone production. So this can create further challenges when it comes to fat loss. And feel free to jump in anytime here. I'm almost done with this tangent also.
Okay.
Um, Finally, some women might have more stubborn body fat. This is something we've talked about a lot recently. I feel like the whole like yoga
Yeah.
mean fasted cardio thing has come up a lot. It really is so interesting though, especially because there's so much like fasted cardio stupid. It's like it's weird to me that this is overlooked. But to burn body fat, basically, bring back to the stubborn body fat topic. To burn body fat, we first need catecholamines to bind to fat cells and mobilize fatty acids out of the cell. Now, there are two different types of receptors on these cells for catecholamines to bind to. We have beta receptors, which increase mobilization of fatty acids and the likelihood of fat being lost from said cell. And there are alpha receptors, which decrease mobilization of fatty acids and likelihood of fat being lost from said cell. So an area with more alpha receptors can be quite quote unquote stubborn and harder to lose from. Now, women especially can have a greater density of these alpha receptors versus the beta receptors.
Especially, I was gonna say, especially in like hips, thighs, those areas that we tend to lose from last. Women tend to
Yeah.
lose from the top down, most of
Yeah.
the time.
Oh, no, exactly. That's a like when you're looking at like when we're looking at fat loss on a female client, almost always what we'll see is like upper back. Interestingly, is the first thing you'll start to see change, where we can really start to see like your traps, your rhomboids, your rear delts start to come through more, your side delts, your triceps in that like side shot. Then we'll start to see like your abs come through, and then lower body is typically the last area to come through. For some people, it'll be flip-flopped where there's more in like the abdomen region, but in those like hips, thighs region, I believe it's up to like 9 times as many alpha receptors as beta receptors in those regions, which can make fat loss more difficult in those areas. Now, none of this is to like paint the idea that fat loss is impossible for women. It's definitely not. But, and this is also, again, this is a lot more applicable to this situation we're talking about. You are that very lean person trying to get leaner versus I'm just trying to get to like a healthy body composition. When we're talking about like these more advanced strategies and things to consider like this. Anyways, we'll talk about more strategies to incorporate to work around these things shortly, but kind of a good primer on why we might need to look deeper than just like, hey, are we creating a calorie deficit as we get deeper into this phase? So, talking through some of the challenges we might be faced getting into this phase, what would you say are the most common biofeedback disruptions we see with female clients in the last half of this fat loss phase, Andrea?
So when we are looking at the different biofeedback markers that we're tracking, any of those could be disrupted. And it seems like some people just are wired to have like their first domino be whatever it is. And that's kind of like their tell that stress is kind of building up. For me, it's always digestion. Um, but there will be some people who like I'll maintain my menstrual cycle, but my digestion will start to change, whereas somebody else might be the opposite. But um menstrual cycle changes. So that could be that we just like lose the menstrual cycle and they don't get a bleed anymore. But that's stemming from they're not ovulating. And so that anovulation can happen before they actually lose the bleed phase of their cycle. So you probably are, if you have lost your bleed phase, you've probably lost ovulation already prior to that.
Hmm.
And that a lot of times just comes from so if we're looking at allostatic load, that's the stressors accumulative from every different source. That allostatic load has now gotten high enough that progesterone is dropping, and so now your progesterone to estrogen ratio is off, and that eventually leads to you lose ovulation. But before that, you might even notice like, okay, now my periods are super painful, and that's that progesterone to estrogen balance being off. So more bloating, more cramping, all of that is kind of the first sign there. Sleep disturbances. This one, this one's super individual, and it seems like sleep is just such a touchy thing for different people, but it can be a situation where sleep has been fine, and then when we start to get really deep into a deficit, we're either waking up or it's just a little harder to go to sleep. If you don't have your macros spread the right way, or just like we've gotten really aggressive now and where there's no way to divide them perfectly to keep from being super hungry, that's going to be something that you deal with at night is like, okay, I'm trying to go to sleep, but I'm hungry. That's not great for sleep. And then hunger and cravings obviously is a big one. Um, that's just something pretty unavoidable. So, like, we can use things like food volume to an extent, making sure protein stays high, good quality foods. But at some point, you're just going to deal with hunger whenever you're getting this lean. And then cravings, which I honestly don't find that cravings are as big of a deal in this situation. I don't know what you think there, but I haven't, hunger is more of the issue. Cravings tend to be something that people deal with more so when they're more beginner. Because once you get into a routine and have the meal plan and everything, cravings just don't seem like they're as big of a deal.
Yeah, I think cravings are entirely like a psychological construct.
Yeah.
I don't know if that maybe I just haven't actually experienced it. Um, but I think it's more so like a like I feel like it's more like I have a craving to like buy X thing. Like it's I
You
don't know.
do?
just
Or
hypothetically,
oh,
right?
okay,
Like we
okay.
don't look at it as like, oh, I would love to have that car, but I can't
Yeah,
afford it. We don't look at that as like, well, there must be something wrong. It's
yeah,
just a normal thing, right? Like at any given time, I would love to have eat whatever food,
yeah,
but it's not like a normal thing. I honestly think that I personally just don't see people talking about like cravings and how to like work around cravings and like kind of seems like that was like the like 2010s fitness era. If that makes sense, like
yeah,
and I don't feel like I see people talk about that nearly as much on like social media. And as a result, I hardly ever have people anymore like, oh, I was really struggling with cravings. It is funny though how that's shifted. I truly think that is just like a like because again, like I don't understand how a craving is different than again, just like again, like that, like I would love to buy that car. It's like a
yeah. Well, but it's different because it's easier to access, and people can do it on an impulse. And whenever you do that on an impulse, you set up that habit, and then that habit becomes more cravings. So,
right.
like, since I've been eating more of a meal plan style, and I make my own meal plan, so it's foods that I like, but since I've done that, I don't struggle with cravings. I used to, but I don't now because I'm not trying to fit that stuff in.
Yeah.
So,
I
anyways,
think I think a lot of times it is also just like hunger. And again, it's not like a
yeah.
like I think I understand what you're meaning. I would say similarly, like the first photo shoot prep that I did where I would just like follow like and if it fits your macros, it would be like I would when I would have had a lot more situations where I was a lot more hungry because the nutrient density and the food quality of the diet was a lot lower. And so I found myself in a lot more situations where I was like, oh my gosh, that food looks so good. That sounds so good. I would love to have that. And I was hungry a lot more. Whereas in the more recent one I did, I just followed meal plan the whole time. Again, like food volume was a lot higher, nutrient density was a lot higher, and I just wasn't hungry nearly as often. So I didn't run into that situation. I think it's the same as like if you like the like cliche of like if you go shopping when you're hungry. But it is like, okay, and then I come home with like all these different cereals and stuff like that that I wouldn't normally buy because it's like everything sounds so good. Even if I'm not in a fat loss phase, I think that's more how I interpret it. I
Okay.
think the biggest thing there is like, I think people think that that isn't something you should experience, like a desire to have these foods if the diet is like, and I
Yeah.
think it's just a normal, it's just a normal thing.
Yeah, I've been talking with people about that a lot recently. Like it's never going to be easy to sit there and like look at a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies and not want one. Like that's just it's not supposed to be easy. Anyways, I think we could go on that tangent. But fatigue is another one. Just as you're intentionally restricting your energy intake, you're going to get a little bit more fatigued. And as body fat is lower, that just is one of the things that tends to come up. And then digestion changes. Again, like if somebody just tends to present this as one of their stress symptoms, this can change. So it could be changes in bowel movements or it can be things like bloat. But most of the time, whenever somebody gets to the tail end of a really aggressive deficit, you're just not going to have as frequent bowel movements. And that's normal because you don't have as much food coming in. So there's not as much waste.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a super normal one. And I think the most important thing here is understanding that none of these are a like you will for sure experience this in the phase, except for you're probably gonna be hungry.
Hunger, yeah.
I think you're just expecting that, but like menstrual cycle disruptions, very, very individual. And I would say it's of course something we want to avoid if we can. And for most people we can. And if it is like, hey, cycles getting disrupted, that's definitely a conversation to have with a client around like, does it make sense for us to continue? Here's like the trade-offs we're choosing. But also largely in my experience, that is much more related to the person's stress load outside of what we're doing with their training and nutrition, because we're managing this intelligently and their perception of the stressors outside of like their training and nutrition. I think that plays a huge role in that. Would you agree?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Similarly with the sleep disturbances, as you said, like it's super individual. I find like for myself personally, whenever I've been super lean and dieting, I'm just so tired by the end of the day that it's really easy to sleep. And I feel like that's when I get some of my best sleep. I find like I don't know, I haven't really had I feel like it's interesting where like the instances I've had clients bring up sleep disturbances is when it's like, dude, we're like a week in the diet and we still have like 30 pounds to go before we're ripped. Like this is not diet related with your sleep disturbances. Um, I remember a couple of years ago, I worked with a dude who was like, I just remember one instance where, and it would just crack me up because I was like, I'm pretty sure this isn't diet related, man. Let's dig into this a little bit more. Um, but that is one where I'd normally like try not to bring that up because I do think as if people expect it to happen, and that's where I always
Hmm.
like to give the caveats here, then it is more likely to like, do I feel tired? Do I feel tired? And then we analyze, overanalyze, and then we can't sleep as well. Cool. Anything else on that before we continue?
Nope.
Cool. All right. Any other common obstacles that you run into? And again, kind of want to just talk through these most common challenges and then next kind of talk through strategies to work around them.
Yeah, so challenges through the fat loss phase, most people at some point are going to hit some sort of stall or plateau. It's not even, that's just kind of par for the course. It's not like something to dwell on or even like something that we have to work through. It's just, okay, now we've had this. What's the root cause? Do we need to address any? Do we need to change anything to keep things moving? Or is it just like we're retaining a little bit of water and we're going to get a whoosh this next week? Um, Stubborn areas tend to take the longest to lean out, which we kind of touched on prior with the different types of fat cells. So, again, women tend to lose body fat from the top down, but sometimes through the fat loss phase, we'll end up having a conversation of like, why don't my legs look lean yet? I feel like they're holding on to body fat and they are. And then we can sometimes also see some stalls in training progress. Just again, like this is more toward the very tail end. You can still progress for that whole first phase of the diet, that whole first half. But once you really start to dig, we want to set things up properly, and I know we'll talk about that, but once you really start to dig and you're just so depleted, you can start to stall in your training progress or even maybe lose a little bit in some of the bigger compound movements. And that's just something that to an extent, depending on when we're at where we're at in the fat loss phase, we might just need to be okay with. But a lot of times there are things that we can do to work around it, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, that's never something that I want to plant in people's minds because I think that a lot of times we're way too soon to, oh, I'm at a deficit. I for sure can't make progress here. When oftentimes
Yeah.
that's not the case. Like almost everyone when they start with us experiences pretty impressive body recomposition where you didn't
Hmm.
actually realize how hard you could train. We're getting leaner, we're building muscle at the same time. It's very, very, very common. Even for someone who has been in the gym for a good amount of time, as most of our clients have when they start. Um, I would, yeah, past that, like the adjust, like us running into a stall is, and we need to make an adjustment is very common. Is a lot of times something that we need to work around. It is also often not necessarily when the client thinks we've sold that we actually need to make the adjustment. And that's such an important part of coaching and having like an objective outside opinion. I think we talked about last week how important it is to look at the averages. And also, hey, if last week we saw, like I bet for you, Andrea, you're down, you said like 2.5 pounds this week,
Hmm.
but last week you didn't hardly see things move, correct?
Last week I was down a pound, but prior to that, it was really sticky. I had like two
Okay.
to 3 weeks at 0.2 loss per
Okay.
week.
But you said it was like your cycle and things like that,
Yeah.
correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Which was the confounding variable there, where and then suddenly we saw a big whoosh. And we could also
Yeah.
look at this as like, whoa, am I losing too quickly now? I lost 2.5 pounds this week. But it's like, let's look at the average, let's look at the big picture. So that's very important. It is very easy to, it's very easy when you start to see things move quickly like that, or you see a whoosh like that, to, okay, cool, this is how it's going to be every week, right? I'm going to keep losing at this rate. And then a lot of times it turns into like short-term memory to where it's, well, I was just losing so quickly the week prior, and now I didn't lose hardly at all. Again, we have to look at those averages. Cool, we're still on track. We'll probably see another whoosh in the next couple of days. But just looking at the big picture there is so important. Um, I don't think I have anything else to add there. So let's kind of dig into strategies to work around all of this. So specific to female clients, a lot of these we use with male clients as well, but a few things that are very helpful at this point, and we're often going to incorporate at this point in the phase, if it at all makes sense for the client. One would be this combination of yohimbine and fasted cardio. And I'll make this pretty quick because, again, I feel like we talked about this quite frequently
Hmm.
lately. But again, I mentioned before how many women have a higher density of these alpha receptors in certain areas that decrease mobilization of fatty acids and the likelihood of fat being lost from that fat cell. So basically, they create stubborn body fat in places like hips, thighs. Now, the supplement yohimbine can help us work around this because it basically shuts off these alpha receptors from being activated and thus helps fatty acids be removed from these otherwise stubborn fat cells. Now, important thing to know here is that yohimbine will only work if you're in a fasted state. Hence why we're doing this with fasted cardio. If we spike insulin, it seems to negate a lot of those effects of the yohimbine, and we don't get the same benefits from it. Now, once we get the basically like these catecholamines have to act on the cell. So like caffeine will help with catecholamine release, yohimbine, another stimulant will help with catecholamine release, has to act on the cell, get the fatty acid out of the cell. Then it is mobilized into our bloodstream. And then it needs to basically be sent to basically where do we need energy, right? So once we get the fatty acid out of the cell into the bloodstream, we need a reason for our body to use it for energy in order to burn it off and to lose that fat. And that's where the cardio comes in. You're using it to burn the fatty acids after they leave the fat cells. Now, this isn't magic, right? If we're not on point with our nutrition, is it going to make that big of a difference? No. But I have seen a lot of instances where, damn, this just does get things moving along so much quicker. Now, yohimbine is also a stimulant, not something everyone tolerates extremely well. I know I've talked about this personally. In that case, I was just chatting about this with, shout out to my girl, Carrie. Had another client where I implemented this week as well, where like if you do get a lot of anxiety from the yohimbine, alpha yohimbine can be another good option. The dosages there are different though, and I don't actually even want it as a stimulant. Do your own research. I don't want to talk about the dosages here actually. Um, but it does vary by how well like someone tolerates it. So do your own research there before incorporating it. Next, calorie cycling. Something we've also talked about very in depth the last couple of months.
Hmm.
So I don't want to get too high into the X's and O's. We did a whole podcast. I think it was called like something around calorie cycling, the different strategies our favorite calorie cycling strategies or something like that. I would highly recommend listening to that.
We did
But
dive into it quite a bit last week too.
I feel like my memory is terrible. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we did. We talked through different. Okay, yes. Or you could just listen to the previous episode. But that calorie cycling episode was a deeper dive still. Anyways, calorie cycling basically means that rather than eating the same calories daily, so basically 1,500 calories 7 days a week, we'll have two or more different macro sets. We might have low days for fat loss and higher carb days around maintenance. We might have dig days, low days, medium, high days, high days. We might have up to four different macro sets. That's not as common, but there will be multiple macro sets, right? We're not just at the same intake every day. Again, I before talked about how adaptive female physiology is to stress, i.e., the stress of dieting. And a big part of continual progress is understanding how to manipulate your nutrition and training to mitigate that stress, right? It's basically understanding that the dosage of the stress that we're applying is very important. Is it enough stress to elicit a positive response? In this case, the like fat loss we want, or is it too much stress for us to actually recover from and actually could potentially hurt our progress, hurt our ability to recover and continue to change from here. So like when we're looking at when stress is too high, or when cortisol, the stress hormone, is too high, it can obstruct the hormone leptin and in turn lead to increased hunger, reduced thyroid hormone, lower metabolic rate. Now, these higher carb slash higher calorie days when we're calorie cycling are essentially stress mitigation, or I've heard them framed as cortisol reset days. Basically, you're interrupting the stress slash deficit signal consistently. our body is sensing like, okay, we have more calories coming in. We're safe, right? It's okay for us to lose body fat. There's plenty of energy, plenty of resources available, which could lead to a slower rate with these negative adaptations happening and keep your fat loss moving along quicker. And this is a really interesting one that we talked about a lot. There isn't a lot of research backing up like calorie cycling, carb cycling yet, but anecdotally, I see it help tremendously with fat loss. I think it's been one of the most impactful things that we've incorporated more frequently over the last couple of years, especially for more adaptive women I've
Hmm.
worked with who typically have to diet on much lower calories, or we see like, man, we need to adjust your calories a lot more frequently. Especially in those cases, I see this working very well. And then also, because many women have to diet on relatively lower calories, just psychologically, knowing, hey, I only have 2 lower calorie days before I get a day at maintenance, just makes the diet easier to stick to overall. So from
Yeah,
there,
as you said, this is one of the biggest improve no, I don't know if I can say that. We've changed so much since we first started coaching, but this is, I think, really leveled up our female clients' results. Like you
absolutely.
said, you were able to get men really good results. I think that this is really the big difference maker there is for men, yeah, we might use a couple like refeed days as more of an adherence tool, but it's really that's the biggest reason for it. For women, it just makes such a big difference physiologically.
Absolutely. No, I would fully agree. Again, that's hard to like say this is the biggest thing, but it does make a huge difference. Also very important is optimizing nutrient density in food selection and food volume. Really, like I mentioned with my own conversation around like the meal plan versus not using the meal plan, like between those two photo shoot preps. I would say as a whole, this is definitely a time where I want someone following a meal plan the last half of this phase because first, there is not a lot of room for error here. When you are, as we get leaner, the amount of precision we need to approach the diet with and how accurately we're tracking, how we're weighing things, etc. In order to continue to make progress at a good clip, the amount of precision required continues to increase until we're pretty close to 100% if we're pushing for a very, very, very lean result for most people. I can think of one client I have worked with where dude was just a genetic anomaly, was not dialed in at all. And I got him ready for a photo shoot and he crushed it. Uh he did really, really well. We got him ripped. But it was crazy to see like just how much he was able to get away with where there would still be like a couple days per week he wouldn't track. And we almost kind of turned it into this like I would give him like free reign where I could tell he needed it. Like, all right, dude, just go do your thing this weekend. And he would be like something about like Dennis Rodman going off, like the Bulls coach told you Dennis Rodman going off and party, and then he came back and had a really good game or something like that.
Yeah.
I figured you would know the reference. I did not. Um, but that's not very many people at Dennis Rodman, apparently. Um, because that's like the one situation I can think of like that. For most people, we have to be very dialed in at this point. Meal plan is really going to reduce room for error. And we're realistically, we're not gonna be able to work in like a lot of meals out. Ideally, we're probably like if I'm at this point, if I'm going for a meal out, it's gonna be the like mustard salad that we talked about, where even then I don't love that that's not like something I can track extremely well. But hey, that's probably not gonna hurt my progress. I might like overestimate. Even if I ask them to like not put butter or oil on this, maybe I'm still gonna try like track a tablespoon of olive oil anyways, just like cover all my bases. But unless it's something we can track extremely precisely, we just really want to stick to foods we have made. And again, like this removes room for measurement error, forgetting to track foods we ate, etc. But also this really ties into managing hunger, where when we're looking at how do we keep someone satiated, the nutrient density of your diet and the volume of your diet, the literal size of the food in your stomach, are going to be two big components of that. So we talked a lot about the vertical diet framework in the past, which I do from a nutrient density perspective covers a lot of our bases, right? I really like to focus on that. And a lot of the tenets of that also work well here when we're talking about food volume. But then also like the satiety index of foods, when we're looking at basically ranking how filling our food are like common foods per calorie. we can then look at, and this really ties into volume. Again, like the literal size of the food in your stomach in part dictates how much fullness we'll get from it. We can really leverage a lot of foods like potatoes are one I'm going to incorporate very frequently with clients. Not only are they very nutrient dense, like a lot of people look at potatoes and like white rice as apples and oranges when they're completely different. Like from a satiety perspective, you will digest white rice so quickly, it won't fill you up nearly as much. Potatoes, like our like a boiled potato, I think is the single most filling food per calorie. Now, again, like if we turn it into like a mashed potato, the more we process that food, the less filling it'll be. But like diced up potatoes and we cook them in the oven, right? And maybe like sprinkle some salt, sea salt on them, or a baked potato or a boiled potato. Something I use very frequently. Oranges are another really, really good option. Berries, like a strawberry is a really any berries I really like. Like I use a lot of like mixed berries just because they're such a good source of nutrients, it's such a good source of fiber, which is another part of satiety, digestion. But like strawberries, we can eat
If I was
such a
going to
big
say
old plate of
fiber,
strawberries.
it gets hard to keep your fiber up whenever calories are low. Oh, sorry, we had a lag, so we just talked over each other.
Yeah,
But
no, I just
all berries are going to be really good for keeping your fiber up as your calories are getting lower. So like raspberries, sometimes I even have to keep raspberries low in people's food whenever they start to bring their food up because it just adds way too much fiber.
it is pretty crazy actually. Like the your is it the raspberries that because it's not the blueberries. Blueberries are like a decent source of fiber, but it's like in that like berry medley, it's the raspberries specifically that are so high in fiber.
Yeah, they have 8 grams per serving, which is like
A cup,
85
like a
grams, I
what?
think. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay,
On their
okay,
own, they have 8 grams. I think it's 8 grams. Yeah.
okay. Anyways, berries are one I leverage frequently. Yeah, like strawberries are again like a lower fiber, but a lot more volume. Like you can get a couple hundred grams of strawberries in, and it's like 25 calories. Big ass salads, like hey, a giant bowl of mixed greens, non-starchy veggies. Maybe we put a protein on the top and use like a low-calorie salad dressing, or you just put mustard on it if you're a sicko, like we are. That's another very good, very filling option, a lot of volume for very few calories. Um, Anything else you would add here as far as like important factors to mitigate what we talked about above?
So we talked about losing some strength in training. One of the best ways to mitigate that is make sure that your peri-workout nutrition is still set up. So have a decent amount of carbs before you go into training. That's going to vary from person to person depending on how many carbs they're still taking in, but usually about 50% of carbs or even more as food gets low around that training window. If somebody can, I like hanging on to just a little bit of peri-workout or intra-workout carbs, even like 10 grams. I feel like it's more of a psychological thing than anything. And also you're just making sure to hydrate whenever you do that. Um, and then getting in a little sodium before you work out too. All of those things can really help support your training intensity. And if we support training intensity, we're burning more calories during training, we're maintaining muscle, and it just ends up being a better overall experience. Um, and then meal timing and spacing are really important because if you end up with like just some shrimp and air at dinner, you're gonna not have a very good time going to sleep
Shrimp and ice
or
cubes.
yeah, exactly. So just making sure that you're not, or vice versa, eating nothing in the morning around your training session so that you can have a decent dinner. We don't want either one of those situations. So make sure and have a little bit more of your carbs weighted around your training session. But other than that, if you keep it fairly evenly spaced, with your protein and your fats, especially, that's going to help keep you a little more satiated and keep your energy throughout the day a little more even keel.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make is again, like I'm trying to save up for the latter part of the day
Hmm.
because I don't want to be hungry then. And it almost always comes back to bite people where like that you don't immediately feel like the energy deficit you've been in all day has been negated by the food you've eaten, even if it's larger. And people are more likely to continue to eat and eat. It takes a while for us to like, okay, I feel better now. Whereas if we again just split our food relatively evenly throughout the day, almost everyone is going to feel the best there. Like hunger is going to be the most manageable in approaching it like that. Um, On a similar note, when we're getting towards the tail end of this phase, when we're about photo shoot ready, how low should someone expect to have to drop their calories?
It's so hard to say because like we talked about before, there's such a big variance between people. Like I probably will have to dig my calories a little bit lower than somebody else who's my height and weight. But I would say there are some people who might get to like 11, 12 calories per pound of body weight. That's probably on the higher end. And then on the lower end, some people have to get under 10 calories per pound. And there's a lot of things that can make the difference here. The biggest one being non-exercise activity. So if somebody just tends to walk a lot, pace a lot, be just like a mover, they're going to be able to diet on higher calories usually. And then of course things like thyroid function, which is going to be help, we're going to support that with the nutrient density. And then just genetics. Some people just seem to have to dig a little bit more. Um, the biggest difference maker though is going to be adherence, of course, and then their willingness to do things like follow a meal plan.
Yeah, that no, that makes a huge difference. But regardless, a lot of people will have to dig more than is commonly put out there. And I think we're
Mhm.
kind of getting past this as well. But for a long time, it was like again, I
You
feel like
shouldn't go
this,
under 60 grams of fat per
right.
day.
Yeah, and like if your coach has you dieting on less than 2,000 calories, you need to fire your coach. And it's like,
Yeah. Never
dude,
go
this
below
just,
BMR.
yeah, which is such a weird, that I don't know why it's like or what, like, and how are we determining our BMR? Like it's, the fixation on BMR. I don't really hear that very often anymore, but that used to be like such a common thing as well.
Yeah.
But I think we're kind of getting past this, but it's just realistically, a lot of people have to dig in a normal fat loss phase, and especially in a phase like this, quite a lot lower than they might want to in order to get the result. That's just the reality of it. I would say, like, when we're talking looking at body weight on our low days, and if at a place like this, we might be, and again, this probably isn't every day of the, this isn't going to be every day of the week. We're calorie cycling by this point. So there will be high days as well. But on those low days, man, we might be at body weight times 8 or 9. That could be
Mhm.
pretty damn low if you're like a 120 pound woman. Even like my last mini cut that I did, my low days were I think like body weight times like right around 7.5 to 8. I was digging pretty deep, had higher calorie days as well. But that is important. Again, that's not every day, but it is important to understand that it is a more extreme result. You're probably pushing your body further than you ever have before. And we want to approach this as intelligently as we can. We want you losing on as much food as we can, but it's still probably going to hurt. And we're still probably going to have to dig. Now, on the flip side, I can think of like, I feel like I have a good amount of clients. I can think of a couple people who are just like starting photo shoot preps where it's like, damn, I'm pretty stoked about where we're going to be able to be at. Like, just based on the amount they're like maintaining on right now and recomping and like getting a little bit leaner without us even trying to. But most people are going to have to dig a little bit lower than we would want. Um, from a cardio perspective and how much is normal there, again, this is going to be dependent on how far we're pushing things and how much can the client make work. I have a client, shout out to Lisa, who's been crushing it. We're just about to start like her photo shoot prep. And for her, we chatted through, hey, cardio is something that we might not be able to make more than a couple days per week. She's also one of those people where it's like, dude, we're eating a lot of food and you're losing right now without us even trying to. So I think this isn't going to require us to dig as deep as it might for others. Similarly, that helps because we probably won't need to incorporate as much cardio, which works well for her. On the flip side, it's not abnormal for someone, again, if it's, hey, we want the best result possible here, we're pulling like all the levers we can to get you as lean as possible. It's not abnormal for someone to be 5 days of cardio a week. Um, my last photo shoot, my last few mini cuts that I've done, it's been cardio 7 days a week. And it's not, I don't know, I don't think it's not really that hard. Honestly, once you, I think you
You
can
just
go
get a
with,
routine.
Yeah, you can go into it with the mindset of like, oh, like cardio sucks. I hate doing this. But especially it's not like you're like running, which it's not like actually painful. You can like just watch YouTube or something like that. I think my last fat loss, my last mini cut, I think I was doing 45 minutes on my rest days and 35 on my training days. So 5 days at 35, 2 days at 45. And it's really, again, but I would say like pretty normal is around 4 to 5 days a week. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd say a normal starting point is usually 2 to 3. And then,
Mhm.
yeah, toward the end, 4 to 5 is pretty normal.
And it all depends. Again, this isn't like a one size fits all process.
Yeah.
I also have clients who like, hey, you got a ton on your plate. Um, you might like coach and work a full-time job outside of that, and you have kids, we have all this going on. Dude, we might not be able to do the like 5 days a week of cardio. We might not be pushing for the most shredded result either, right? So it's very dependent, but
Patricia Patricia went all the way to stage lean with zero cardio. But then
man,
there are other, I know she's
okay.
a freak, but most people are not that way. Most people are gonna need to incorporate a little more movement.
Yeah. So it varies a lot. And again, if it doesn't make sense for you and we can get the outcome we want without it, cool. We don't necessarily have to add it in. Just another lever we can pull to move things a little quicker. Um, let's go ahead and wrap it up here. Next week, we will be talking about peak week. So this last week leading into the photo shoot and the photo shoot day. Any final thoughts to add here, Andrea, before we wrap it up?
No, I'm excited to talk about peak week.
Likewise. Cool. All right, team. Hopefully, y'all enjoy the episode. If you want to apply to work with us, hit the link in the show notes, and we will catch you all next time.